I realized that it wasn't as much of a technical problem than a political one. So, my dreams were sort of like crushed at that point where, because I dedicated my life to solving this very big problem for my country. But in that, so I still didn't, like I didn't really think much of it because I'd already started experiencing other problems. So I guess you can even tell, like a young from a young age or whatever, I've always been thinking about problems around me. Um, so I learned how to code at that time. We're in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering, and I started learning how to code, and I really saw the power of software. So I was like, wow, this is actually quite interesting. Like, instead of spending time building infrastructure and whatnot in other forms of engineering, you can actually build software like in the comfort of your own computer and then have that work. And then I experienced another level of problem that I was going through and my other friends were going through, that as international students, we actually had a much more difficult um, time transitioning into a new system in Canada. So as a result, a lot of my friends had to like restart the program or have to drop out. So that was another problem that I really wanted to prevent. So then I started to think about, how do I end up solving this problem? And with the power of software, I was like, hey, I guess I could build something that could help. And I had this hypothesis that students were spending too much time on Facebook, YouTube, whatever, instead of actually studying. So I wanted to create an anti-distraction tool for students. And then I picked up a couple of friends and we started focusing on that problem without validating it. We just wanted to like build and build and build. We worked on it for a while before we realized that, this is not what people wanted. Then I started talking to customers, and my customers in this case were students and professors. And that process, I got to learn more about the problem, and it morphed from an anti-distraction tool to a time management tool. And I was very impressed with that process of just like validating your hypothesis by talking to a lot of people. And then, I was on my own at this time, and I was like, I'm going to build this out. And I ended up having to meet several different kinds of people who were also interested in the problem. And I ended up building a team of about 6 people, 6 of us. And then we started building out like this app. And then over 4 months, we built an Android and an iOS application to essentially help students improve and enhance their productivity. And after we launched, we had about just a couple hundred users, nothing big, nothing crazy. This was like my trial at a startup. And all of a sudden, even though it didn't work out, where I realized that, wow, I really enjoyed this process. And I was like, I really want to experience this way more in my life. So that's when I learned about product management. So product management for me was very accidental. It wasn't until after that experience of my, in quotes, failed startup that I decided that, what, this is what I wanted to do. And then after that, I decided to get formal training and probably develop myself. So I went into internships at Microsoft in the headquarters in Redmond, where I was working on IoT solutions for Windows platform. Then after that, I went to Apple in Cupertino, California, where I worked on the iPhone product operations team on the launch of the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus back in 2016. And then after that, I then spent 2 years at a smart home company, Ecobee, where we're making smart thermostats, smart light switches, and now smart cameras. And then I was leading the software development there. And then right today, I'm at a company called Copper. They make CRM software for enterprises, small and medium enterprises. And that's sort of just like a quick intro. And then I'll get into the question. If you have any other questions regarding like my path to product, I can jump into there a little bit more. And yeah, like Emma said, I recently wrote a book on product management because I also had my own challenges of breaking into product management, which is why I wrote that book. It's called How to Product, and it essentially talks about breaking into the product world. And I'll be borrowing from some of that while I'm answering some of your questions in here today. And the way that I approached that book was I interviewed 40 product managers for different companies, like Shopify, Coursera, Google, um, startups, different places, different countries, to try and understand what their journey into product management was. Like my journey was different, their journeys were different. Oh, there we go. Sorry. I feel, yeah, so we're having technical difficulties. I feel like I get unmuted sometimes. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I interviewed for the product managers to sort of like try and figure out what are the main themes for getting into product management. Um, so that's what the book is about. So I'll link the book here towards the end, but I'll probably borrow some of that into that. So I'll start with the first question on the top, which is where do you start when you want to break into product management? Skills, corporate scale up or startup environment, mentorship, network, or communities. And there's also a similar question, which is how to break into a new role. So I'll start with how to break into a new role, and then we'll then talk about how to break into product management. Um, so going into any new role is scary because number one, you haven't been doing it a lot. You might be scared because of this. Other people that have been doing it for a while. There's a lot of competition in there. I think the first thing I will think about is why. Like, why do you want to break into that new role? I think that's the most important thing because that will come up a lot. Not even in interviews, but you also need to like continue to tell yourself as you go through that hard journey of going into a territory where you're not familiar with. So I think it's super important to really ask yourself, like do some soul searching and reflection to really figure out why exactly I want to break into this new role. Because that would pretty much lead your motivations and how dedicated you will be to be able to go into and transition into that journey. So I think generally, and from what I learned from people who try to move into a new role, regardless of product management or not, they obviously start by researching into what the role is, like what are the skills, what are the responsibilities, and then you try to sort of match that with um they want to like match that with like what they like what their passion is, what they think they can do. They try to identify their skill gaps and try and figure that out because you need to understand, and draw that side to side comparison of like what do they need or what do I need to be in this role and what do I have. And then once you have that, you can then draw a comparison of like where your gaps are. And then it's then your job to figure out how to fill in those gaps. And a lot of people try to fill in those gaps by, you can take a course, you can do a lot of like self-studying, you can reach out to a lot of people. Reaching out to a lot of people was also a good and effective step in this process because you get to see what they do firsthand and how they handle problems and how they've sorted out all the challenges that you're about to go to. So I think like that's like a very neat step that I found that people have found like extremely valuable whenever they're doing that. So essentially, yeah. So just to reiterate and to summarize, to break into a new role, do a lot of soul searching, trying to understand what are the things that I needed, what's like required in the job, what do you have, and what gaps do you need to fill, and then you have to figure out how to get those gaps. And I think that's applicable to every role because what you then do is like you then treat it like some form of adventure. Like if you're asking for if a job is asking for a to D, and you have A and B, and then you have to figure out how do I get C and D, and then how do I get C and D? If you're the type of person who likes self-directed learning, you can go online and just like figure out how to get C or D. If you want like more official course or more directed learning, you can go take a course. You can reach out to different people, just get it in an ad hoc way that isn't necessarily linear. So I think that'll be the best advice like I'll give. But if I needed to move into anything, that's where I'll start. I think that's then applicable when you then get into product management and you try move from different types of product management. Okay, so that's that question. Any questions on that one before I continue the how to break into a new role? Okay, I'm assuming silence is no questions, so we can move on. And also feel free to like interrupt me if you want. Just like post a question in the chat. I'll be like, oh, I need to ask a question, I need to clarify, and I'll slow down. And I hope everyone can hear me okay. So
1 second, Sefunmi. Just to shout out that if you need to interrupt the speaker or you want to raise a question, you can feel free to unmute yourself. Right.
okay, great. So where do you start when you want to break into product management? And I might actually share my screen because I have a very good diagram for this. I might just open, give me a second. Where, sorry, give me a second. Sorry, give me a second. I'm trying to find it. Actually, sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties. Give me a second. I would find it. Okay. Give me a second. Okay, no, sorry. I'm still trying to find it. I'm so sorry about this, everyone. What's this phone? Okay. Yeah, I think this is it. Yeah, I got it. Where is Zoom? Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Or Ava's, can you see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great. So the first question is how to break into product management. Let me express this. So I divided into, so before I even started writing the book, I tried to do some research to try and figure out like what is the problem that I'm trying to solve here with this book. And essentially, I did research into, I found like a couple people who actually wanted to get into product management. And then I did research with them. I interviewed them over a period of time. So I interviewed a couple people who are still in their search, and I interviewed people who have been able to like break into the product management space. And I realized that the period of exploration are divided into three steps. There's consideration, decision, and preparation and practice, I think. So in the consideration steps, it starts with like some self-reflection. So people are trying to figure out like, you know, what are they trying to do? They're trying to sort of like unfulfilled with their current career path, and they want to find purpose for what they do. So that's what it starts with whenever anyone is trying to get into product management. Next thing, they research different career opportunities. So they don't just purely think about, oh, product management. They try to research different things. They research, oh, technology is like a booming industry. What can I do in technology? Technology seems interesting. So they become hopeful. And then I also broke it down to like the emotions that they feel based off of what they see and how they express themselves. So they do a lot of like extensive research. They come through different articles, job descriptions to just try and find a match for like what can they possibly enjoy doing while they're doing the search. And then when they then finally discover product management, they're usually positive because the job description seems enticing. It seems to match with whatever interest that they have. It seems like something that they can do. It seems something that they wouldn't feel overwhelmed doing, or they'll feel more fulfilled doing. So that's like when they start to consider and they say, okay, do you know what? I think I can get into product management. Next, after that, there's the decision-making process. And with this diagram, they're divided into two. So there's people who are already in the technology industry, and then people who are not in the technology industry. And and it's important to clarify both of them because they have totally different journeys. It's actually way more extended by pretty much like shrunk it to be able to fit in this space. So whenever they're making that decision to actually pursue it, then again, they continue to research the job opportunities, the job responsibilities. They're very pleased with this. And then like it's very appealing to them because they want to be able to do this. They're like, okay, we can figure this out. And then this is then the point that I spoke about when they're identifying the skills that are needed for the job. So once they realize that the skills, number one is either that they feel like they have it or they don't have it, right? The people who are in the tech field, they pretty much, they feel relieved because like, oh, I know these things, or I can do these things, or I know someone who has done this, or I know my coworkers who have done this. If you're outside of tech, they're usually anxious because you have terminology or things that you haven't heard of, but you kind of feel like you can do it. And there goes like the observation and the pain points is like they have skills that they have, but they don't really have, and they might feel like the drive to learn might not be very high. So at that point, they feel quite anxious. Next, a lot of people actually chose to network after this step. And the people who are already in tech, they're very interested in this because they already have an existing network. You can reach out to people that might be able to help them. The people who are outside of tech are typically discouraged, and they're like, I don't really know anyone in tech. I don't know who I can talk to, and at this time they try and figure out like other ways, whether they like take a course or they do self-directed learning, because to ease the pain of not having that. And so it's challenging for them, but some of them still eventually pull through. And after the network, they obviously reach out to PMs. And reaching out to PMs is kind of like very challenging because PMs are very busy people. They already have a lot on their plate. So even the people in the technology industries, it's very tasking for them. Outside of tech, it's very frustrating for them because they can't really find people to speak to and spend a lot of time like understanding what their pain points, understanding what they're doing. But for the people who are able to have conversations with PM, they're sort of like, sorry? Hello. Sorry, hi, Nicole. Do you have a question? Okay, I will continue. Sorry, if you're not talking, please mute yourself so it doesn't like interrupt any other person. Thank you. If you have any questions, feel free to mute yourself and like interject, and we can chat. So when they have conversations with the PM, they typically try to understand how they got into their current role, and how, like, what do they do, what's their day to day, and that sort of like excites people about wanting to even go into the PM space. And then lastly, the last point is the preparation, and then this is when you're figuring out like the interview prep and trying to figure it out. There's the job search. People are typically like angry about this because the biggest thing about product management is it's hard to get the job without experience, and it's hard to get experience without the job. It's a chicken and egg problem. So it's like, how do you even solve it? People are there are a lot of boot camps around the world that are trying to solve this problem, and I don't think it's actually been solved yet. I do have like a hypothesis for how to solve it, and I'll discuss that during this conversation. But it's a very difficult problem, which is why the job search is very extensive and long and difficult. Next to the interview preparation, there's obviously a lot of resources online to be able to look at whenever you're going through interviews. So that's not a big problem for certain people. It's just quite tasking. And then job interviews, if you have any job interviews, it's about trying to prove yourself as much as possible, to be able to convince them that you can be a possible candidate. So that's essentially sort of like, where do you start? You try and figure out what part in the journey are you? As long as you need to ask yourself the question, are you in the consideration stage? Are you on the decision stage, or are you in the preparation stage? And then after that, then in terms of skills, like what skills do you need? I think product management is different at product management is very different in different companies. And one of the ways that I've been able to find a way to explain that or describe that is with this diagram. So I'll go through each piece here. And I think that determines the kind of skills that you need. So I think for me, based off of what I've seen in product management and what I have done, there are 4 pillars of product management that is divided into strategy, technical development, user facing, and execution, essentially. So in this first quadrant, the product manager is here looking to understand the why. This is right, understanding like crucial customer problems. They do a lot of customer interviews. They do a lot of exploration. They do a lot of thinking 1, 2, 3, sometimes 5 years in advance to try and understand, where the industry trend going, where is the market going, where is technology going to be in the next couple of years. They want to understand the different problems that would arise from these whys, and they're understanding which customer segments it affects, and they try to then match that problem with an opportunity, to a business opportunity, and then they sort of present like somewhat of a strategy that, you know, this is what we should do. This is like our cloud strategy, or this is our go-to-market strategy, and this is our mobile strategy, this is our push notification strategy, based off of this is our strategy for voice. So a lot of those PMs are in the strategy and user-facing space, because they're thinking, you know, more, they're more abstract in their thinking. It's not as you know, things don't come to fruition as quickly as, you know, other things. So in terms of the skills that you need here, you need to be great at research. You need to be able to understand how to talk to customers effectively, how to communicate, how to present, how to even just like listen. Listening is like a very important one, because it's not everything that customers explain or, you know, voice about that you should go ahead and fix. So those are like the crucial things that you need to do at this time. I think we have do you have a question? I don't mind, this one's waiting. Admit. Yeah, so that's pretty much like in this stage is all about like listening, doing a lot of research. And this is where you'll find a lot of consultants. So I'd say like consultants really fall into this category. So if you come from a consulting background, this is where you'll be mostly, because like you'll be trying to solve very high level strategic problems for customers. The next quadrant is the what. So you can assume that the people, after the people have figured out like, oh, this is the strategy, this is the problem, this is what the solution would be. So you then have the PMs that would they'll define a clear vision from that abstract problem and say, hey, this is where we need to focus on. And then they then work with, this is where you then start working with the designers to list out possible solutions. And then you can do this by rapid prototyping, usability testing. You don't necessarily have to build stuff at this point. This is usually more design heavy, putting things in front of customers, talking to customers again to try and understand the problems that they experience now, and I relate them to the problems that they can experience in the future. And then once you then do that, then you have what you come up with, like, you know, minimum viable product, as you heard, or the first version of what you can actually give to customers to actually like play with and try out to see if that solves that problem. And yeah, that's what figuring out the SWOT is. And in terms of what you do here, I think then you need to have the knowledge of like usability, design. I think designing is important. You need to have like attention to detail. You need to be able to start working with people. So teamwork is very important here. Here you can be like a solo person. Here, figuring out the why, you can work by yourself and do a lot of research by yourself. But here, you're gonna have to start working with people, working with your customers. So communication is a big thing here. Working with design is a big thing, working with our customers, and then you start using the different tools you need, whether it's Sketch or Figma or what have you, to like figure this out. And then next is the how. And this is the most common type of product management that's actually practiced, which is where, and this is the technical and execution phase, this is where most people start working with the development team. So once you figure out the what, you already have an idea of what the design is going to look like or what the solution is. Now it's about scoping out the development effort. It's about building out like a backlog. It's then iteratively developing those features with an agile development type agile development framework. And then it's a matter of like planning your sprints, doing your scrum practices, and whatnot, and all those things to be able to make sure that your project is on track. So it's a lot about agile development, project management, doing a lot of beta testing to ensure that early builds of your product have actually solve the customer's problem. So this is what people end up doing mostly at companies. You have people that is like managing backlog of developers, PMs are probably working with developers and whatnot. And this last piece is not very common, but this is more about the technical product management side, where they're thinking about the high level strategy and the technical pieces. They're usually involved in choosing the technology stack to use. They understand how to scale. They understand how to track metrics for success. This is very data driven and thinking about what's like the developer productivity is going to be, what's the product quality, what's the product stability. Those are the different kinds of product management, and the tools you need here and the skills you need to be technically savvy. You need to have a good understanding of technology and where that's leading, and what are the different trade-offs from choosing, you know, cross-platform development versus native development. You need to be involved in those conversations. So I'll say these are the 4 quadrants of product management. A lot of product managers have the opportunity to go through this cycle and do all these again, because I think this is what product management is all about. Some people are sometimes stuck in each of these sections, but I think if you want to be a full stack PM, there's like full stack developers who can build anything. If you want to be a full stack PM, you need to go through these entire motions and really feel every single thing out. That's when and you be more comfortable and you be able to like be adaptable in any industry that you go to. So yeah, so the book talks a little bit more about this. So if you decide to get a copy, I'm going to read this in detail. So I'll say those are kind of like the skills that you need. Does anyone have any questions as it relates to that? Okay, I shall move on. And then next thing, corporate or scale-up environment versus startup environment, or mentorship networks, communities. So I think the decision to pick whether you want to work at a big company versus small company, I think that's entirely up to the individual. I don't particularly recommend it. I think depending on what background you have, you might find it easier to go one or the other. So for example, if you have a consulting background and you're used to working with clients and you do that, you might want to strengthen your skills here, or since you're strong here, you might want to go in with one of these skills and then try and figure out how to build the other one. So in that case, like working at a big company might be helpful, because when you even think about these 4 quadrants, typically big companies spend a lot of time doing this. Small companies are mostly focused on like these 2. Big companies are pretty much focused on like the when and stuff like that, versus a lot of people are just very, we just do whatever we have to do. So it really depends what environment you want. I find that startups are a little bit more flexible on the people that they bring into the workforce, because they're trying to move fast. They give a lot of people opportunities to like learn and grow and whatnot. So I think it will be helpful if you want to like just be thrown into the deep end and figure everything out in a very fast-paced environment. I think then picking a startup is the best way to go. But if you don't want to do a startup, then I think going to a large company that already has existing practices or existing people who are willing to like mentor and help and teach, I think like having a big company will be better. And I think that helps when you have somewhat of a domain knowledge. So if you have an accounting background and you're trying to become a product manager, you can find like an accounting technology company that you can come in with your accounting knowledge, with your domain knowledge, and then help build out the other areas. And the chances that you'll be able to do that in a larger company will be much better than a smaller company. So I think it's deeply personal, because there are a lot of trade-offs that you would make. I wouldn't say I recommend anything. I think it really depends on like where you're at and what you think you can handle. Startups are typically a lot more work than some large companies, because you're required to do way more than what your job description says, which in the long term I think would actually pay off, because you'll be able to like, if anything, touch a little bit of this or try and have a better understanding. Versus larger companies, you're meant to focus on a specific area. So if you're working on strategy, that's what you'll be working on most of the time. If you're working on just like user-facing execution, that's what you're working on. If you're working on, just like working with the developers, that's usually what you're focused on. So you don't really get to, move and try a lot of different things as other people would. So I think that's like a personal decision. I think my book really covers like that decision points on like what's better for you depending on what your background is. And if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer it. And I will also leave like sort of the last 10 minutes for questions after I answer everything else. Next, mentorship network communities. I think it goes back to the point of consideration, decision, and practice. So a lot of people, if you can't do it on your own, then yes, reach out to communities, reach out to mentors. I think reaching out to PMs was like a big step that I found true and found very valuable when people wanted to move into product management. And then I think those people have a big influence on where you choose to go, because some mentors will say, go work at a startup. based off of a conversation with people, say go work at a startup. Some mentors will say go work at an agency. An agency is a place where you can just work on like several different projects that working with clients and whatnot. And they're very execution based. So depending on the mentor that you have or the people that you have in your life will determine, you know, what path you choose. But I think it's extremely valuable to network with people and speak to people, because I think those people will be able to let you know on the things that they have done that didn't work out, and the things that they find way more successful, and what other candidates have done that has also been super helpful. So yes, I would say like, yeah, definitely reach out to as many communities as you can, and seek mentorship for those who are willing to give those opportunities to people. Okay, next. I think I spent a lot of time on where do you start when you want to break into product management, which is, I think, the biggest bulk of what this conversation is. Next question. What are some key moments or opportunities one should pay attention to when breaking into product management? I think there's a chat. Yeah, if you have questions, feel free to shoot them here, please. Yeah, definitely. I think I'll leave like the last 5 minutes for questions, because I think I've touched on some of that and the rest of the conversation. Yeah, so what are some key moments or opportunities one should pay attention to when breaking into product management? Key moments or opportunities. I think here I would say maximizing as many in-person conversations as possible. Product management is very competitive, and I haven't seen anyone go very far by just applying online and just like, oh, I'm going to put in my resume, because even people with experience have a lot of challenges. The interview process is very, very biased, and it's based off of your thinking and your experience, which will work against you if you don't have any experience. So I think it's important to definitely maximize those in-person conversations, because I think at the end of the day, those are the people who would point out, opportunities that aren't necessarily clear or open to a lot of people. Early on in my product management careers, I had a mentor who would like point me out to opportunities for jobs which haven't been posted yet, which means that you're already getting the first pass and first pick to be able to speak to the hiring manager, instead of them blasting it out at a lot of people like applying. So I think that's a big one to pay attention to. Like when you're finding a mentor, when you're looking out to communities, like what are those people saying? I also think you also need to pay attention to yourself and what your needs are. Like, don't follow the crowd. I think product management has been like, oh, the cool thing, and a lot of people don't necessarily do it well. So don't just follow the crowd and do it because maybe it's cool, or someone said this or someone said that. Try and really understand yourself so that you're a lot more fulfilled about that. Okay, there's a question here. What kind of tracking metrics for success can be utilized as some examples and you've had experience with that you recommend? Tracking metrics for success. Well, tracking metrics for success for what? For yourself when you're trying to get into product management, or when you're building a product? That's a follow-up question. So Angelina, yeah. So my follow-up question is, what kind of tracking metrics are you specifically looking for? And then is that for yourself when breaking into product, or is that actually as a product manager? What are the more important ones? So I'll wait for you to answer that, and then I'll get back to that question. So in summary, what are some key moments or opportunities one should pay attention when breaking into product manager? Pay attention to yourself and what you're interested in. I think that will determine what companies you decide to join, and pay attention to building relationships that last and mentorship that can really help you move forward. Next question was efficient product lifecycle management. Pretty much this diagram goes through this process of like, once you figure out why the problem exists, you need to figure out what the solution is going to be, and then you need to work with the development team on how you need to bring it to life. However way you choose to do this, I've not seen the cycle any different in any of the companies that I have worked at or friends have worked out. Everyone follows this pattern, and I think this is the best way to be successful, because it starts by spending like half of this is deciding what to do and what to build, which is super important, because you need to clarify what the problem is first, before you even start building it. I feel like a lot of product managers, a lot of companies, you know, they focus on this how, because this actually takes the longest time, because that's when you're working with developers. Um, it's like they think about an idea, they don't validate it, or they have a hypothesis and they go straight to building it. And I think you spend a lot, you learn a lot by just like validating your ideas, and making sure it's actually the correct one before spending the next 3 to 12 months building out something that users will be like, no, I don't need this. This is totally crap. Um, the question, what kind of traffic metrics comes in is some examples you've had, what you recommend for products. So when you think about metrics, and you answered this question before the last one. When you think about metrics, there's no one size fits all for metrics. Metrics is totally based on the kinds of problems that you're trying to solve. So you can just look at things like, oh, how frequently is it used, and all that. I mean, there's the standard like R metrics, like AARR. So it's acquisition, which is like actually getting people into the funnel to use your product. There's activation, which is getting them to fall in love with your product. Actually getting them to perform the motions to learn about your product. So activation is like learning about your product and what it offers. Then retention is actually them falling in love with your product and then using it over and over and over again. So it's like totally useful. Retention, revenue is obviously making money from those customers. And then referral, that's when other people, your customers tell other people about your product. So those are like the high level metrics. But then when you then actually apply it to different things, you need to be very, very specific at noting those things down and actually communicating when those things are. So a common example that I'll give is like, people like, oh yeah, let's measure how many people are using it or how frequently it's used. And the example I can give is like, if you think about a car, a vehicle, right? Every car or every new generation car has a backup camera, right? And the backup camera essentially works whenever anyone keeps reverse, right? So if you put your gear on reverse, the backup camera activates and you move forward. So if your PM is looking at that metric, that like, oh, whenever the user clicks reverse, the backup camera comes up. That's like 100% success metric, because it's like our feature is being used. But it could turn out that like they're actually not even using the backup camera because it's not placed correctly, or it's the quality is poor, you can't see properly, or it doesn't really showcase that kind of view. So you need to be able to look at other things in addition to what you're measuring, which is why not just metrics is important, but also not just quantitative metrics, but qualitative metrics are important. Because if you observe your customers and while the review camera is on, if you see them looking back, that's like a field product, because your product is not solving the user's job by letting them know what is behind them. So when I think about metrics, you need to understand how it applies to your product and your customers, because there's some products that they actually want to reduce users, like, so not users, like usage, like they don't care if users are using the products a lot of the time. So one of the companies that I work for, Ecobee, our job was to actually reduce the amount of interactions people had on the app, because we invested a lot of time in like AI and machine learning. Because if the AI and machine learning was doing its job, then people wouldn't have to go and change their thermostat. So people using the app was an indication that we weren't succeeding on our products. So if you come in as a PM, like, well, you want to get people to use all your products, and you go into a company like that, you need to change the way you're thinking. So it depends on the goal and why users are using things, what are they using, how are they doing that, and then you determine the kinds of metrics that you need, that you can say, this product is successful because of those metrics. I hope that's clear, and I hope that answers it. I didn't really touch on metrics in this book, because this book is more about like how to get into product, but it's a very good book. I think it's called Lean Analytics. I'll link it in the chat. That really talks about metrics properly, and it's like super great about that. Last question: what can I do to transition to the product manager's role? I think I touched on that. So I don't really have much. So I guess we have like 4-ish minutes. Does anyone else have any question? There's a question here, Anthony. In the cycle of product development, which areas do you still find challenging from vision to execution of the project? That's actually a very good question. I think I read this article I think a while back, and I think they interviewed like 1,000 product managers or something, and I think there was like, what's the biggest challenge? And I agree with them, which was like, sometimes you don't know if um what you're building will really solve the customer's problem. So I think the why is the hardest part of so in that diagram that I showed, the why is the hardest part because that kind of leads everything you do. It's easy to build any, like, honestly, if you have a very competent development team, it's easy to build anything. You can build anything given like the amount of resources that you have. But if you don't build it properly, then users are not going to use it. Think about like Google Meet, or Google Hangouts, or even Skype. Let's actually take a second and say Skype. Skype is a video conferencing tool. They were consumer first, but then they later pivoted um, into enterprise. Skype was founded 17 years ago in 2003. And today, in the middle of a pandemic, they're not even they're not even talked about as one of the video conferencing solutions. There's Zoom, there's Meet. So that's an example of a product that they didn't really understand the why. They built it very well. They figured out the what and the how. They have like a solution out. They have a lot of users, but they're not a leader. And when they had like a large head start. So I think if you understand that why effectively, I think that regardless of what your competitor is doing, they will not be able to catch up with you, which is what Apple does very, very well. Think about Apple, whenever they go into a market, even if they're last, they do it super well, because they understand the why behind it, and then they can do all those things much better. Someone said, how can we access the book? Yep. Yeah, someone has already posted it. So how to product, yeah, that's it. How to product.io. Go in there, put in your email, and you'll be able to get the book. The book is still free from what I understand. I think starting next month, I think we'll start charging for it. So you can go and grab a free copy right now. Any other questions? Yeah, that's a very good question. Like, what's the most challenging? I think that's what I find the most challenging, because customer needs are always changing. They change at like a rapid pace that, if you're solving a problem now, and if you figured out what the problem is, figure out the why and the what, and then you're building stuff for the next 3 months to deliver that initial problem, the needs could have changed. So it's a never-ending cycle, especially on the consumer side. So yeah, it's a very good question. Any other questions? I know we're running out of time still. Yeah.
I have a question along the
Yeah.
lines of like changing customer needs. Yeah, for someone who's just very new into product, what advice would you have for them when it comes to prioritization and how to go about it?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think my solution for that is kind of like my solution to everything in product manager, which is always talk to your customers. Like, keep an open line of communication with your customers, because I think like that's super important, because if anything has changed in their life or their needs, they will let you know. And by they will let you know, it's not like they'll tell you directly that, hey, this stuff has changed, based off of their actions, which is why like question design is also important, like the kind of questions that you ask people. You don't ask people leading questions. So once you always have an open line of communication with your users, you would always know what you need to prioritize, because things will change, and if you have that open channel with them, you will definitely test early prototypes of whatever you're building. Now, once you test those prototypes, you'll know if those prototypes are actually hitting the spots, or if the things that they find more important. And that's the thing. I've been to sessions where you give customers something, and they get to be able to do one thing, but they complain about like 6 or 7 others. But we know that's still a successful product, because that one thing that they can do is the most important thing, and those other 6 things are not as important. So it's about weighing and understanding. So when you're having a call or talk with a customer, it's not just, you don't just listen to like what people are saying. Oh, this is frustrating, I hate this, blah blah blah. You try and understand what the core motivation is, and once you do that, that gives you clues, because like customers will always complain about something. They want something. It doesn't mean they'll necessarily stop using your product. You just have to understand where that's coming from, and how important it is for them before you prioritize accordingly.
Cool. I have another question.
Yeah.
I was just going through your book, and then I saw like there's like contributions from about 25 other product managers.
Yes.
And one of them caught my eye, Kyle Lubieneki. He's once given a talk to Product at Nairobi way back in 2018, and he talked about how to stick to product vision, like from vision to reality, and how to build your products from the product vision. So I remember he talked about how when you're going about creating a vision, there's a certain amount of collaboration, simplicity, and motivation. And one of the things that PMs usually do is motivate a team around a vision, right? It's sort of like you use your power of influence to sort of like motivate guys around the vision for your product. Do you have anything to say about just how to go about that?
That's a very good question. And I think the way I've written about those before briefly, and I think the way I describe it is build a culture. And when I say build a culture of what it means to work with you. So every PM is different, and you want like your developers, your designer, that when they're working with you, they have like an experience that's centered around them, but also centered around you. Because they look to you to set that vision, they look to you for influence, they look to you for motivation. So it's like a balancing act. And when I say build a culture, I think working in a company where there were 17 PMs, in my company, and sometimes we had shared resource. Like I wanted to make sure like I stand out, and whenever I'm working with developers, like they love working with me. You want to be the PM that they're working for, because one of the things I found is if developers love working with you, there's nothing that they won't do for you, because it's like, wow, I don't want to let this person down because like he's my PM, and we know why we're doing this. And I think it goes back to being yourself. And I think that's why like in the book I describe the kinds of people that should be product managers. So like not everyone as a product manager now I think should be a product manager. There are a lot of successful product managers that are out there, but they aren't necessarily great product managers, because there's always like a trade-off. There's some product managers that like they're great at like strategy and all that stuff, but they can't work with people. There are people who are great at working with people, they can't do that. So I think I talk about what it means to be like an entire product manager, which is why I talked about that diagram. Because if you have what it really takes, then you can just be yourself and it would come naturally. Because I describe product management as like it's like a person. It's not really, it's like a verb. It's not really like, and it's based off, obviously you can build on that skill, but some people have the natural inclination to just be product managers based off of like their interest and whatnot. So if you can be yourself and just set that example and also be flexible around them, and you're serving them, I think like that goes a long way.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, Kyle is great. Yeah, he was a member of my product. He's a great guy. He's a very good contributor to the book, so I really enjoyed speaking to him. Yeah. Any other questions before? I know we're slightly over time.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, thanks so much for the wonderful insights around how to break into product management, as well as sharing how you go about it using references from your book. I think I'm definitely gonna get it. I mean, is it now available for free?
Yeah, it's still available for free. It's available for free on my website. But I think in next month, next month I don't think it won't be free anymore, I think. But yeah, I think this is the last month that's gonna be free.
Okay, great. I think I'll hit the download button very fast.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right, then. This is great. Thank you so much for having me. Happy World Product Day.
Really
You're welcome.
appreciate it. For everyone else, thank you so much for attending this webinar. I guess we shall see you next month for our next webinar, which is about the difference between project management and product management. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you.